My name is Jim McGillivray and this is the Pipe Box, your source for all things piping. If you find this video useful, please give it a like and please subscribe to this YouTube channel to see more videos like this. We're going to go over some music today, and you can print out this music by going back to the description of this video on my YouTube channel. You will see a link to a PDF there. Today I would like to talk to you about a minor technical point that will mean a lot to some of you and not very much to others. Exactly what I'm going to talk about are two doublings. E doubling played from F down to E, and the D doubling played from E down to D. I find those two doublings particularly difficult, especially if the note before them is a short note. I have found in the past that I miss those doublings more frequently than any other doublings, and I'll tell you why. I'll use the E doubling as an example. If I play a G grace note from F to E, as I said, normally those two fingers would hit the chanter at the same time. But then that F finger has to make another grace note, and it's difficult for that finger to hit the chanter and almost immediately move again. There's not enough time for that finger to really settle on the chanter and get ready to move. The same thing happens with the D doubling from E, where the E finger is hitting the chanter and having to move again almost immediately to play the E grace note. That can make those two doublings more difficult than any other doublings. I have a solution, and I will tell you about it now. It's a little different from the way I generally play grace notes, but it really helps me with these two doublings. It's very simple. When I play a G grace note from F to E, I'm going to lift the G finger, but I'm also going to put the F finger down just a little bit earlier than I bring the G finger down. So the G finger lifts, the F finger hits the chanter, and then the G finger hits the chanter. That allows the F finger to get to the chanter a little bit earlier and settle before it has to play the final grace note in the doubling. Similarly, with the D doubling, I'm going to lift the G finger, and the E finger is going to go down before the G finger, and then the G finger is going to follow. It's a little awkward to play that in slow motion, but I hope you get the idea of putting the one finger down a little bit before the G finger comes down. This takes a lot of time and practice before it becomes second nature in your playing. It took me a long time and a lot of practice of the exercises that I'm going to give you before I could execute this slightly altered doubling perfectly almost every time. So I have 4 exercises for you. The first one is very simple. It's just playing a simple G grace note from F down to E and from E down to D. Here's the exercise. If you find this tricky, you're probably not alone. It sort of goes against the grain of everything we've been taught about how to put a grace note accurately on a note, and in fact it is very different. We're focusing on the G grace note here in this exercise and in the next one because, as you know, again, if you've read rhythmic finger work, that the G grace note is the pivotal point in any doubling. Once you have the G grace note right, you have 80% of the doubling licked. Let's move on now to play the G grace note after a short note, which is what our second exercise is going to have you do. Here it is. One of the nice things about playing these doublings in this fashion is that it sounds exactly the same as if you were playing the doublings with the fingers coming down at the same time. There's no difference in sound, and hopefully if you can master it, it makes these two doublings just a little bit easier. Okay, we've been focusing on the G grace notes to this point. Now we're going to add the doubling into the mix. Our next exercise is exactly the same as the first exercise, except instead of playing G grace notes, we're going to play doublings. Again, you're going to play the G grace note exactly the same as you played it when there were no doublings. Same G grace note. Focus on the G grace note. Always focus on the G grace note, and the next note will take care of itself. Here is exercise 3. Our final exercise was a workhorse of mine for many, many years. I always found E doublings from F and D doublings from E to be particularly difficult. I would miss them, and there were tunes I couldn't compete with because I couldn't trust myself to make these movements. For example, the opening of Mrs. John McCall. E doubling after a short F. D doubling, second ending of the third part of Jeannie Carruthers was one thing that I couldn't consistently play. I always had trouble making that D doubling. So I played exercise 4, which you're about to hear endlessly, until I could finally play these alternate doublings. And I will confess, it probably took me a couple of years before I could consistently make doublings in these fashions. So I won't fool you, it took some time. But this is the exercise that I played more than any, as well as some other ones that you will see in my rhythmic finger work technical tutor. I really focus on these two doublings in that tutor. So let's hear exercise 4, where we're going to have doublings and short notes at the same time. Here's the exercise. So there's a slightly different perspective on two very specific pieces of technique that crop up pretty frequently in our playing. I mentioned my rhythmic fingerwork technical tutor earlier. At the time I wrote that book, I didn't really address this alternate E and D doubling concept. I came up with that idea a little bit later. But all of the exercises in rhythmic fingerwork on E and D doublings would still apply no matter what method you're using to play these doublings. So take your time with this. Be patient. It won't happen quickly. But if you work exercises 3 and 4 in particular, it will happen. That's it for this week. For me, Jim McGillivray at the Pipe Box, good piping.